Thank you all for coming, and thank you for presenting today, Jeremy, Bruce, and Cynthia.
Thank you for having us.
And we encourage everybody to put themselves on mute during the presentation and then during the interaction. You're welcome to turn your cameras on, turn your sound on, but for now, we'll do that.
All right. Well, just because we got the time running, then I'll just give a bit of an introduction. I'll give some more folks a chance to settle in. My job is just to welcome everybody, give a little introduction, and introduce our teachers today. So hello, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thanks to Aisha Bell Hardaway and Mark Chupp, Tanya Kaiser, and the social justice team for making this happen. My name is Jeremy Bendik-Keymer, and I hold the Beamer Schneider Professorship in Ethics here at CWRU. I live in Shaker Heights with my family and have roots stretching back in Ohio and matrilineally through Southern Ohio to the Spišsky region of Slovakia. I grew up in central New York on Haudenosaunee land. Has there been a time in recent memory when what the SJI stands for is more needed? Well, there are 545 children today whose cries would tell us no. Where are the parents from whose arms they were torn by the US government? Yet, truth be told, our time stretches back at least 500 years when European imperialism launched its colonial greed, arrogance, and violence across the world, mapping the globe into its geography, enslaving millions, colonizing many millions more, and in a short period of time killing countless millions of African and indigenous people, where they joined the realm of their ancestors through a veil of pain and deprivation. For more than 500 years, white settlers and colonialists have benefited off the backs of others, using systems of private property, capitalism, industrial mass extraction of Earth's resources, and nationalist wars and borders to maintain a system that today is throwing the planet and its order of life into a mass extinction and a climate imperiled Earth. This system needs to be dismantled and reconstructed by us all, led by those who understand from the inside what it has done wrong, with our nations and others honoring treaties with the indigenous, recognizing sovereignty and jurisdiction, making reparations for chattel slavery and its 150-year afterlife, stopping the obscene wealth generation of the 1%, and putting the sustainability of the land as a moral authority at the center of our cosmos, not private property and profit. For the next hour, we will learn up, in the words of Faith Spotted Eagle, Yankton Sioux Nation, from two Native American leaders in our community. In that spirit, and as a white settler myself, I open this session with a land acknowledgement. It's the minimal work settlers should do to acknowledge colonialism and the moral authority of lands. I will just give you a copy of this here. It is adapted from something that the Social Justice Institute has used. Case Western Reserve University resides on the ancestral lands of the Lenape, the Delaware, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Shawnee, Wyandot Miami, Ottawa, Potawatomi, and other Great Lakes tribes, the Chippewa, the Kickapoo, the Weya, the Pinakashaw, and Kaskaskia. This land of the quote unquote Northwest Territory was ceded under force from the US military by 1,100 chiefs and warriors signing the 1795 Treaty of Greenville. Subsequently, the treaty wasn't honored by the United States of America, just as all 374 treaties with Native Americans ratified by the US Senate have not been. Today, there are nearly 28,000 Native American people who live in Northeast Ohio, neighbors, co-workers, classmates, and community members who represent over 100 tribal nations. So I want to welcome and thank our two teachers today, Cynthia Connolly and Bruce Kafer. We at CWRU are grateful for your time and patience in teaching us what you will, for helping us be more sensitive, aware, and directed in our effort for social justice. Cynthia Connolly is a citizen of the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians located in northern Michigan and serves as the development director at Policy Matters Ohio, a nonprofit policy research institute. Cynthia earned her Master of Public Administration from Cleveland State University and a Bachelor of Arts in American Culture and Native American Studies from the University of Michigan. Cynthia also serves on the board for the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy in Washington, D.C., is the vice president at University Settlement in Cleveland Slavic Village neighborhood, and on the executive board at the Lake Erie Native American Council in Cleveland. Bruce Kafer is an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux tribe of the Lakota Nation. He is the Minority Program Manager at the VA Northeast Ohio Healthcare System, a psychiatric registered nurse who works on population health and Native American programs within the Veterans Health Administration. He is also at work on his doctorate in nursing at the Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing here at CWRU. He has given recurring workshops on trauma and veterans issues for many years here and elsewhere, and has often spoken on Native American issues, including here at CWRU and at many local institutions. So I'd like to thank our guests, and Cynthia is going to lead it off, and then Bruce is, and then we're going to talk. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Ani, Denisikwe and Dishnakas, Aji Jacques and Dodom, Wakanaka Singo Dawa and Donjaba. Hello, my name is Cynthia Connolly. My Anishinaabe name is Buje Woman. I am a citizen of the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians, which is located in northern Michigan, and I am from the Crane clan. I always like to introduce myself in my indigenous language, Anishinaabemowin, just to make sure that I acknowledge my people and where I'm from. So I always try to make sure I open with that, that introduction. So I'm here to talk specifically about Native American representation in the 21st century, as well as our visibility. And I always preface this with, you see Native imagery everywhere, it surrounds you everywhere, but actual Native people are quite invisible. And one of the things I do when I give these presentations to, I mean, I have the gamut of audiences. I have elementary schools, I have high schools, college students, libraries, senior centers. And I always start with picture a Native American in your head. When I say Native American, what image or symbols or words come to mind? And it's almost always feathers, headdresses, teepees, tomahawks, arrowheads, chief wahoo. And then I push them a little further and I say, can you name a modern Native American, someone who's alive today that is indigenous to the United States area? And crickets. Like, I have yet to have someone actually name a modern living Native person. And it's super awkward because I'm standing right in front of them and had just introduced myself. So you literally could have just said Cynthia Connolly and would have gotten a gold star. So, I mean, this is an example of how much work we have to do with how people perceive and talk about Indigenous people today. And we're almost always represented in this historical lens as what I call feathered and leathered. And we're never really shown as these modern people, as your neighbors, your coworkers, your classmates. Just as, you know, I'm sitting here in this room with my Zoom and, you know, my coffee, and it's really interesting to see that dynamic. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is this one study that recently came out. It's called Reclaiming Native Truth. It's done by the First Nations Development Institute, which is now kind of a little bit of an offshoot into an organization called Illuminative. And when this came out back in 2018, was the end of 2018, Indian country collectively just kind of was like, this. This is exactly what we have been feeling for decades about. And yeah, right in the chat box, I put together a little bit of a resource for you guys. So feel free to click through that as needed. And I'll get to that a little bit later. It actually provided quantitative data to the exact things that we felt as Indigenous people when it comes to our invisibility. As a quick summary, some of the things that they had found is that we absolutely are almost exclusively discussed in these historical contexts, and that 2/3 of the respondents said they didn't know a single Native person. 2/3 of respondents did not know a single Native person. You add to this, we're about 1.5% of the population in the United States. And if you think about how much you learn from people, right, that are different than you in your day-to-day interactions, and how much, and this, again, this is why diversity and representation matters, correct? And think about how many stereotypes that you've crushed by meeting people who just don't match that box that you were told that they are supposed to fit into. We don't have that luxury very often because odds are you are not going to run into Indigenous people day to day. And 2/3 of people do not know Indigenous people. Another shocking statistic from the study is that only 59% agreed that the United States committed genocide against Native Americans. That is a shocking number, and it will kind of lead into a little bit of what I'm going to talk about a bit later. Um, and it also kind of reinforced kind of the idea of that natives are everywhere, but we're not actually. 36% of those surveyed firmly believe they have some Native American ancestry. And this goes back to the lore and kind of the need to justify what had been done to Indigenous people. So if you can claim that blood, then therefore you will not have that guilt. And them talking specifically to the white community in this instance. And it also kind of shows that everyone wants to adopt this kind of historical mythological aspect of Indigenous people, but don't want to own or acknowledge the struggle and the socioeconomic issues that we're facing today. That part of being Native, they're not going to ever claim. It's always kind of this historical, like ancestor kind of conversation. The one thing that I like to point out as well, I'm like flipping, I wanted to show a couple of slides of imagery, but I think I'm just going to skip that in the interest of time. One of the best quotes I have is actually from Crystal Alcohawk when she was presenting on this research. She said the complete lack of representation in media and pop culture in K through 12 education not only erases us from the American consciousness, it inadvertently creates a bias. People were less likely to support certain rights and social justice issues for Native people when they had zero perception and understanding of who we are. Invisibility and erasure is the modern form of racism against Native people. And what happens when you don't have those day-to-day interactions and you're not, when 2/3 of Americans don't know a Native person, it opens up this void, right, of who we are. And that void is filled by pop culture, by media, sports mascots, all of this, what I call the false narrative of being Indigenous. And it's never reflective of who we actually are as a modern people, of my family at home. One example I have is when I was touring schools here in Cleveland, some Cleveland public schools. We did the tour, and then, does any parents have any questions? And I raise my hand and I say, how do you celebrate Thanksgiving at your school? And they kind of like were thrown back, like, of all the questions, like that is not, it's not like what facilities do you have or how's your STEM program? It's how do you celebrate Thanksgiving? And I had to clarify, I said, my family's Native American, and I want to make sure that my children and their classmates' first exposure to Indigenous people in the classroom is reflective of what my children see at home. Because that is a privilege that white children have that my children 9 times out of 10 do not have. I would even say 9.9 times out of 10 do not have. Because often that false narrative between Columbus Day and Thanksgiving are the first time that our children are exposed to Indigenous themes, and it's almost always these false narratives, and just immediately starts this domino effect of who we are as a people that we constantly have to climb over. One other example I like to give, because I'm trying to like tell a little bit of a story here too, is I actually wrote a blog for the YWCA of Greater Cleveland, and I don't think I put a link to that in my resources. I'll make sure to drop it in the chat box before I leave. And it was all about invisibility and representation. And I had a parent in our REI group say, I guess I just don't really quite understand of what's going on. And I'm in this, brand new building, gorgeous, Nelson Mandela quote over this grand staircase going up to the second floor, welcome and hello in all the languages of the world. And I said, we have that up there, and it's really inspiring to show how global and inclusive and diverse that we want this school to be, but we have welcome and hello in every single language of the world except the people of the land we're standing on. And heads exploded. That is the invisibility. Nobody stopped to think we have all the languages of the world, but the land of the peoples who land we're standing on, nobody thought to think, let's put Ani up there, put Bushu, put there's I think the Haudenosaunee word for welcome is up there now, but they put it up there. But it took me, a Native woman, to point that out. And I can't be everywhere. Native people aren't in every classroom. We're not in every school. We're not in every office space. And so we're asking our non-Native allies to start stepping up to the plate and recognize and call out that invisibility. One thing I've asked the schools to do is to, so I'm moving a little bit into how we're positioned in history. The report that I had mentioned earlier showed that 13% of K through 12 schools do not talk or are only talk about Native American, or 13% of K through 12 curriculum mentions Native Americans after 1900. So 87% refuse to talk about us after 1900. So again, positioned in the historical past, not talked about or referred to as modern people. And so kids automatically only see us in this historical context. One story I like to say here is when I was in 4th grade, I grew up in Detroit, full disclosure. So we went to the Ann Arbor Natural History Museum, and we had a floor of dinosaur bones, floor of fossils, floor of extinct animals. The last floor was Native Americans. And I got excited and turned to a classmate. And this is, again, I kind of chronicle this in my YWCA blog. I turned to my classmate and I said, oh, I'm Indian like that. And my classmate said, you can't be Indian. Indians are extinct. But what did we expect that 9-year-old to think after seeing 3 floors full of extinct animals, fossils, and dinosaur bones? So this is a systemic problem of how we're portrayed and how we're seen 9.9 times out of 10 in this country today, either as sports mascots, Disney Pocahontas movies, figurines behind museum glass, stories like, Columbus Day and Thanksgiving. And so that is actually causing a lot of issues with how we're perceived. And the study that we found for Reclaiming Native Truth found that people were less likely to support those social justice issues, like, because they're so stuck of viewing us as these historical people, they dehumanized who we are. And so it actually directly correlates to, I'm dropping my headphones here. It directly correlates to being apathetic towards our issues. And they found that actually starts spilling into other people of color. So it's not just harming Native people, this apathy, it immediately spills over into other communities of color. And I'm in the interest of time, I do want to move over into Dr. Stephanie Freiberg's research, because I'd be remiss, living in Cleveland with the baseball team that we have right now. That is one of the largest obstacles that our community has to overcome in almost every conversation we have. It actually kind of is prohibitive to a lot of our progress as a community. And she found that Native imagery, specifically harms Native youth. She showed the Native youth images of, sports mascots and stereotypical imagery, and they had a direct negative response. There were 0 positive outcomes when Native youth viewed this imagery. She also showed them really bad socioeconomic statistics that we live with, like high suicide rates, high poverty rates, high school dropout rates. So all these things are actually really bad, right? That we experience day to day and we see in our own communities. They showed them those statistics, and the negative imagery actually had more negative outcomes than the actual terrible statistics that I just laid out for you. They did this same study to their white peers. They had an increase in positive outcomes. So they felt better about themselves. They felt more powerful, like happier. And so just seeing the complete opposite of what is happening, and the fact that our youth are having very negative outcomes, lower self-esteem, suicide ideation, like I'm talking very serious negative factors and outcomes versus their white peers who have the exact opposite. And a lot of people ask me, well, why is that? And I say, one of the really great scholars on this is actually Philip J. Deloria, who is Vine Deloria Jr.'s son. I had the privilege of being at Michigan when he was the chair of the department over there. And I highly recommend his book, Playing Indian, which I do have in my resources document. And the whole thing starts with nostalgia. If you look back at the turn of into the 20th century, the West was quote one, right? And it was an era of great American progress, westward expansion, the Industrial Revolution. Things were being invented left and right. So it was a period of like this American greatness. And almost immediately after the West was won, Americans were like, man, do you remember those good old days of like cowboys and Indians and circling the wagons? And they really latched onto that nostalgia of the Wild West. And that carried in well into about 1960, when I think, like the John Wayne Westerns and stuff were all the fad. And so a lot of businesses capitalized on that imagery and that fad and started changing their brand to fit that fad. And we know nostalgia sells, right? Like how many Jurassic Parks have come out? I think we had some Independence Days come out. Like there's so many reboots and remakes that we're seeing, reunions. Nostalgia sells. And so that is exactly what had happened. And now we have Indians everywhere, but actually nowhere. And I think I linked to Dr. Stephanie Freiberg's research in my resources, and she really lays it out quite clearly how harmful this imagery is to Indian country, how problematic it is, and fueling into the fact that it's not allowing us to be, and define ourselves who we want to be, because it's being done for us constantly. And so having the power to define ourselves is one of the most important things that a community and an individual can have. But with this invisibility, with the lack of education, with this imagery that's dominating society, we lack that power. And so I do want to turn it over to Bruce, because I know that he has a lot to say about kind of the impacts on our mental health and that. So I'm going to go ahead and kick that over. One more thing though, because I know it's going to come up. I always have people ask, what can I read to catch myself up, right? Because everyone's like, we realize that we haven't been taught a lot. We realize that we're behind on our education. What can I read? And if I would give you textbooks this thick to catch you up to what we have not been taught in our school systems. So I recommend to everyone, just the same as we learn about other people and other cultures. Yes, reading is important, but also, consume our news, like it on Facebook, follow it on Twitter. So I actually gave you a very long list of people and outlets to follow on Twitter. Consume your news as you would any other news. That's how I get up to date with my information. Follow the thought leaders, the activists, the researchers on Facebook and Twitter, and really just start incorporating that stuff into your day-to-day life. And you'll find that it's going to leaps and bounds put you above where you had been beforehand. So I'm going to turn it over to Bruce.
Okay, can you hear me now? All right. My name is Bruce Kafer. I'm a registered nurse at the Cleveland VA Medical Center, and I'm fortunate to be able to work on some of our Native American programs in the nation. My Lakota name is Wahachanka Yapi Yuhamani, which would translate to walks with shield. And so this was a name given to me by my extended family, by my Tiosh Baya, to be a warrior for the people. And so I'm blessed to have discovered I come from a long line of healers in my family lineage. And my great-grandmother lived through the Battle of Little Bighorn, which occurred in 1876. And her name is Tashunka Wing. which translates to horsewoman. And my mother can remember walking with her as a child and collecting medicines. She would have my mother go run and go get that, and she would bring it back to this basket. And my mother grew up on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, and she remembers that unchi, which is the Lakota word for grandma, would never sit in a chair. She would always sit on the floor on a special rug that she had made, and she would never use utensils. She would use a knife that she had and a bowl that she had made, and she would eat out of that. So she was regarded as having lived in the teepee days. And listening to that and discussing it with my mother, it was clear that Unchi never acquiesced to this new way of life, this that was taken over by the United States through this process of hegemony or rule or domination by sheer numbers. So there's a lot of things that we can talk about today, and Cynthia has certainly underscored a number of things that happen in colonization. This concept of colonialism, where a group came over. Now, I wanted to try to, I shared a PowerPoint with you, but there was a couple things I wanted to share. And let me see if I can do this. Share. Can you guys see this? Jeremy, can you unmute and tell me if you can see that?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, so this process, I think one of the things, you know, when we begin to look at decolonization is how we think about things, because in colonization, there's this process of socio-cultural inculcation to a way of thinking that would be reflective of the larger group. So from prior to Christopher Columbus coming over, when we look at the power of the Catholic Church, and so we're looking way back to 1452, and keep in mind that there was no separation of church and state at that time, and they were looking at non-Christians really as heathens and people that should be destroyed. And so the Pope rather issues these documents, this Inter Cetera document, these papal bulls, which are formal statements by the Pope. And remember, the Pope is regarded as having a direct line to God. And so he's giving these formal documents to men like Christopher Columbus that says to go forth. And if you encounter anyone who is a non-Christian, they should be destroyed, subjugated, made into slaves. And so when we jump ahead to, let's say, we'll look at this Johnson and McIntosh here, where the natives, the indigenous people of the lands, are only regarded as having a right of occupancy, and that, you know, by the United States coming in and taking over this land, it's valid. And there's this view, if you think back to the Declaration of Independence, where, you know, it was God who gave us the right to declare that we're not going to live this way anymore, and we're going to start our own thing. And in the 29 criticisms of the king, it says that, you know, the Indians were viewed as savages. And so let me see here. I want to go over. So we see this progression of colonization, this process of taking over, the establishment of reservations, and this focus on that, you know, we can assimilate natives. And so as we see this increase in power, we see the Congress who makes treaties illegal. And let me just jump ahead here. There's a map of things as they unfold. The Battle of Little Bighorn there in 1876, when my mother, my great-great-grandmother survived that. And let's see. And so this unfolding process of kill the Indian, save the man, and this process of assimilation where we're looking to make indigenous people look like everyday Americans, or what would have been considered acceptable at the time. This is a picture of my granddaughter standing in the Black Hills of South Dakota, looking eastward. And I wondered how many times, did a Native girl look out for that. So that's one of my favorite pictures. But what I want to do is just talk a little bit now. Let's see, how do I get out of this? Talk a little bit about decolonization, because, as you begin to educate yourself about what occurred, that is one step in the decolonization process. Let me see here, stop share. Okay, I think I'm back. And so, so one of the things that we do in the, I'll use as an example, working with the Tucson VA Medical Center, we've established a program. It's called the Gathering of Healers. And what we discovered in Arizona, there's 21 federally recognized tribes now. And so we won't get into at this time why certain tribes are recognized and why other tribes are not recognized. But that there are, hundreds and hundreds of tribes. I think today there's 574 federally recognized tribes, and there's many tribes who, for various bureaucratic reasons, are not able to attain the type of recognition that they would like. But what we discovered in the Southwest was when a Native veteran would walk into the VA Medical Center there, number one, they had grown up on the reservation. So these are oftentimes very separate areas. It's almost like a cultural divide between what was one time traditional Native America and then the rest of the country. So they're kind of surrounded by this other world. And so when they would walk into the medical center, somebody might be mean to them or might not understand what they're saying and would treat them rudely. And there was a famous study by the Department of Health and Human Services called the phenomenon of the front desk. And what this meant was when someone encounters, in this case, a healthcare organization, and there's someone behind the front desk who may not be culturally sensitive or may hold certain biases against others who do not look like them, and they treat them in a negative way, that individual does not come back to that organization. That's the phenomena of the front desk. So what that results in is a barrier to healthcare access for individuals who were treated poorly. And so in response to this, we developed a program called the Gathering of Healers. And what we utilized was a traditional model of healing, which would include, we would call it a holistic model of healing, which would include spirit, mind, emotion, and body. And so we immersed VA staff into a setting. We rented out a camp in the mountains north of Tucson. And we began the day with a ceremony. And basically, when we look at programs that are successful for working with natives, what you will find is a traditional framework. And so what I mean by a traditional framework is it's guided by concepts that have been in existence since time immemorial. And so our traditional lifeway practices as natives have been around a long time. And if we think back prior to the European invasion, like with my relatives, they were surviving on the plains, which is a very challenging environment. They were using a collective way of life where I would always think about others first rather than myself, because if I didn't do that, we would not survive as a people. And so that lifeway practice and that framework that guided our relatives by affirming their connection to Mother Earth. And, we talk about, some people will say, well, what is Native spirituality? And so Native spirituality for my relatives was really a way of life. We would not separate spirit from everything else. So spirit, mind, emotion, and body. And of course, you know, those of us who are in research, we like to separate things. We like to come up with conceptual frameworks and talk about these things, but there's some utility to it, because when we think about this framework, and when we immerse our fellow co-workers in the VA, many of which who are non-native, and we begin to allow them or provide an opportunity to look at the world through different eyes, look at the world through the lens of an American Indian or a Native American or Alaska Native. But we begin the day with ceremony. And the reason for that is we are affirming our connection to Mother Earth, each other, everything, and everything within the universe. So in the language of my people, we have a term that is mitakuye oyasin, and it translates to all my relations. And it underscores really that the spirit of the Wakan Tanka, or the great mystery, or what some people would call God, permeates through everything. You, me, all people, animals, fish, plants, birds, sky, earth. So even a rock would be regarded as having the spirit of God within it. And so when we affirm that connection, when we remember that we have this connection, it begins to change our perspective on our existence, on my own identity, that I am not just alone. So this type of modality or approach, programmatic approach to healing has been important for Native Americans. So that is probably one thing to think about when we establish programs. And like just even today, when Jeremy gave his introduction, we were affirming this land acknowledgement and the peoples that were here before us. So it widens our vantage on the phenomenon of the human condition, that we're not just solitary beings, but rather we have this connection not only to each other, but those that came before us. And when we look to them, we can begin to acquire some of that wisdom that provided the integrity for their path in life. So, you know, so really, in terms of healing, and as far as, you know, things like PTSD and other mental health challenges that our Indigenous people would face, many of these traditional ceremonies can be integrated into the Western healthcare setting once we begin to recognize some of these concepts. And this is what yields funding as well for these programs, is that individuals like myself, like Cynthia, you know, will look to translate some of these traditional concepts into the English language so that we can acquire funding, because we're faced with the reality that we are still in this process of decolonization, or beginning to move in a different direction from acquiescing to the imperialistic constructs that surround us and that are often frustrating to our relatives today. You know, as you've heard in the news, challenges for voting, challenges for healthcare access, a very difficult healthcare profile when we compare it to other groups. These are things that are still with us and have been since the time that Westernization and colonization has occurred. And while we have made some progress in some areas, this is the change process. And so those of us that might look at change from a research perspective, we recognize there is a pre-contemplation stage prior to making a change, where somebody might not be thinking about making a change at all. Or then they move into a contemplation stage where they may begin to contemplate the wisdom of change. They might try to initiate a change and then finally be able to maintain one. Well, it does appear that we are still in this contemplation stage. Granted, there are some outstanding examples of people who've initiated some changes, developed some programs that are helpful for healing, and have been able to successfully maintain those programs through being able to sustain funding from some type of grantor or funder from somewhere who recognizes the utility and the importance of programming that is culturally appropriate for groups that have been historically marginalized and continue to experience disenfranchisement on various levels. So I know we're on a time constraints today, so I wanted to open it up for discussion and see what types of questions people had or what types of things that they wanted to find out about further. So I will open it up, and Jeremy, how does that sound to you?
Sounds great. One thought was if people have questions, if you could also drop them in the queue. If you know there's already someone speaking, that way we can see what's coming up and everybody can be heard. But Bruce and Cynthia, do you want to call on folks when they raise their hand, or would you like me to do that? Whatever you want.
You can go ahead.
Yeah, Jeremy, please provide
Okay.
us some leadership here. I'm not really familiar with Zoom, but I'm glad I was able to share that screen.
Yeah, no, it worked. So yeah, so if anyone's got a question, just raise your hand this way, or you can use the raise hand function on the participant
While we're
list.
waiting for folks to formulate their questions, something that Bruce had mentioned about our spirituality and being kind of just with everything together. There is a book out called Braiding Sweetgrass, and I highly recommend this book. And there's actually a part in there that mentions that humans, when we go outside and into the woods or the forest, and you smell that earth, right? That smell of the earth. It actually releases oxytocin in your brain, which is the same hormone that's released that creates the bonding between a mother and a child. So, I mean, just those really simple things that show you like how connected we are actually to the earth, and our body does respond to our surroundings, especially to Mother Earth. So the current colonized mindset is that we need to conquer and own it and be on it. And that's actually not how our bodies are built. And then also the other quick thing I wanted to talk about is about decolonizing wealth. So just pointing out that 0.4% of the wealth in this country from wealthy individuals and the philanthropic sector go to indigenous-led organizations. And a lot of that wealth was amassed by land resources taken from indigenous people. And again, on the backs of slaves. And so when we're talking about the colonizing of wealth and how that's being shared, that's another conversation that we could spend an entire hour on, and highly recommend Edgar Villanueva's book, Decolonizing Wealth, on that topic as well. Just a couple of things that Bruce, you clicked into my head.
So I'm in classroom, I'm a big believer in holding silence. It's not a bad thing to be silent, because sometimes it just takes a little time to do stuff. So I'm just, if I let it go silent for a minute, that's because I really do want people to have the opportunity to talk. So take your time, think about anything you'd like to address to Bruce or Cynthia. Don has got something here. Don, would you like us to read it or would you like to say it yourself? Either one is fine. Okay, Don said, is it advantageous to relate the indigenous struggle to other occupied people around the world? How do you folks think about that?
You know, I feel like everyone has their own history and their own story. The root goal, right, is always the same: amassing wealth, land, assets by the colonizers. I mean, at some point, Ireland, for example, was occupied. And right now we have an Irish American male running for president. So there are different outcomes of this direction of history, right? And maybe one day we'll have a Native woman running for president. But I think there are a lot of parallels. I think the root of a lot of these occupations are the same. But I feel like the individual experiences, and you could even see this in the United States, right? Even each tribe's experience with colonizing and genocide differs from tribe to tribe, especially when you look at East Coast versus the Plains. I know my husband, we're just on opposite sides of Lake Erie. My husband's Onondaga from Six Nations, and his experience is a little bit different. You know, his peoples are a little bit different than mine, and just understanding that while the ultimate goal of occupation and colonization is the same, let's just acknowledge that the lived experience for people has varied.
And let me add that, you know, certainly there, as Cynthia said, there's numerous groups that have these struggles, these enduring struggles. As far as Native America goes, you know, obviously we understand that the struggle continues, but including what are the successes. So, you know, because Cynthia pointed out so well how we are hidden in society and absent from so many things. And oftentimes we hear of these, you know, the terrible health profiles, the genocide, and, you know, all these negative things, but we don't hear enough of what are the successes, and because people will often ask, like, what can I do to help? And how can I become an ally? So there are, you know, community organizations like Lake Erie Native American Council, who is looking to form alliances with individuals and groups. And there's other groups like the Committee of 500 Years. There is even the Cultural Gardens group, you know, who are looking to make alliances. So it's important that you can reach out to these groups and you can lend your support and continue to build partnerships. And for instance, you know, we've built a partnership with Jeremy, who has been so helpful in bringing the local indigenous voice to Case Western Reserve University. And we've been able to bring in some fantastic speakers and have fantastic events at Case. And so to continue and looking at, like, what are these solutions, what can we do, and certainly there's overarching concepts for all groups that have had struggles in the world, and we're always grateful that we can focus on, you know, American Indians and Alaska Natives.
Jeremy, I had a question for you. Jeremy, in the context of atonement and reconciliation, if in fact Lebensraum was mimicked and instituted by the Nazis, if in fact Lebensraum was instituted by the Ashkenazi Israelis upon the Palestinians, how can we have an authentic reconciliation without addressing this issue? Has there really been some of the questions that salient issues that Bruce had raised, if in fact that atonement is superficial or reconciliation is superficial in relationship to the institution of Lebensraum in these other places and here in the United States. What is your conception of the authenticity of reconciliation and atonement within the context of 2020? Because it seems to be a clinical projection or fragility when it comes to these issues. And I'm saying the issues that Bruce raised are relevant and authentic, but it seems to me beneath that is for it to really be truly relevant and authentic, there has to be a quantitative and qualitative level of atonement and reconciliation. So Jeremy, could you speak to that, Dr. Bendik?
If I could jump in here really quick, though, I'm not quite sure the context. It might be something specific to what you guys are working on there, but I will say you cannot have reconciliation until you have truth come out. Until you could acknowledge what that you're reconciling for, yeah, it'll fall flat. So and actually there's a documentary called Dawnland, Dawn, like Rising of the Sun, Dawnland, and it's about a truth and reconciliation process that happened up in Maine. And Canada also had a version of this. And I think there was also something done similar in South Africa that the Maine community had replicated. But you cannot have a reconciliation process until you have that truth. And so that's always the first part.
My addendum is
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I like to say this, Cynthia. My addendum is that the issue has been laid bare, and particularly in the latter part of the 20th century in terms of the atrocities. It's been written on, and it's replete. Now, in fact, the atrocities in Israel and the certain issues around Lebensraum. So my issue is that the truth is out there. It appears to me that a lot of people choose not to embrace the truth when it comes to atrocities. Because
the truth is absolutely out there, right? But we know, and we have the study and the data, that it's simply not being taught. And we're not being incorporated into basic history lessons for 87% of K through 12 curriculum in this country. So what I propose is state level changes to history standards. Like that absolutely is an easy, quick solution to history standards. Like
That's right.
And like simple audits, school district wide, of how Native people are talked about and portrayed in your classrooms. And if you find in that audit it is only pre-1900, you have a problem. But that has not happened. I don't think people understand or know how pervasive this problem is. And it wasn't until this study came out in 2018 that we actually had that quantitative data to show how pervasive a problem this is. So while the truth is out there, and again, Native people and Indigenous people have felt this and known this for generations. But I would say that this is a more like recent movement of really pushing, now that we have this quantitative data, that like, yeah, we now have firm facts and truth, and it's out there, and now it's time for that change.
I really appreciate, thank you so much. This has been so impactful and informative, Cynthia and Bruce. My gratitude to you from me and Mark. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for connecting SJI to Bruce and to Cynthia. We look forward to working with you guys in the future. The resources, we will make sure that the links and the resources appear on SJI's website. For those, you'll be able to go back and find them after this session. Not today, but at the beginning of the work week, okay?
Just one last word on that. Bruce, is it okay if we share your PowerPoint along with that? Okay.
I assume so, that's why I put it
Absolutely.
in. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you all.